Hey guys, we have a ton of info about how subclasses, mods, stats, and basically everything will change in Lightfall, so I thought it was time to make a video on how to best prepare your current builds to be ready when Lightfall launches. I'm going to order this by what is in my opinion the least to most viable builds to run in contest mode raid for anyone considering running Hunter. For each build, I'll go over the subclass, mods, exotics, some weapon suggestions, and how to deal with each champion type. I'll show off a little footage for each, but keep in mind that this is in a lost sector with arc singe, so arc damage is massively increased. For each build, I will say what is absolutely required, and then have a few other recommendations that I use. These can be swapped out for anything you enjoy using or think will improve your playstyle. First up, I want to give out a couple of honorable mentions. While this build is probably viable for contest mode, it is going to be nerfed heavily, and while I was testing it under harsher conditions, it just didn't hold up. The young Ahamkara Spine Gunslinger build. As it stands, this build is very strong, and with the new fragments coming in Lightfall, you would think it would be getting even better. But there's a big drawback. Ahamkara works currently by having high mobility, 2 utility kickstart, bolstering detonation, and focusing strike. All of these mods are required to hit the stat cooldown to make the ability rotation infinite without any encounter specific buffs. However, come Lightfall, all of our stat tiers are being nerfed, and most likely these mods are being hit hard as well. On top of this, kickstart mods are now being changed to remove all of your armor charges, which are used for the new Font of Might equivalent, so using the current build will lower your DPS. On testing this with 80 mobility without a kickstart, this build simply does not work for DPS anymore. There may be a way to build it in Lightfall, but for now, I'm going to keep it an honorable mention. And my second honorable mention is the Shatterscape Hunter. While I absolutely will try to cheese a jumping puzzle with it, it's obviously not viable for doing encounters. So with that out of the way, let's get started with number 5. My first build will be on Arcstrider. While this subclass is absolutely viable for a contest mode raid, I still feel it's lacking a lot of the safety and consistency of the other subclasses. There's a lot of flexibility in this subclass, which is a nice benefit. The needed parts of this build are Gambler's Dodge, Combination Blow, Flow State, Lethal Current, and Spark of Shock. Additionally, I use Gathering Storm, Pulse or Flashbang Grenade, and Sparks of Resistance, Ions, and Magnitude. You can flex all of those options however you want. For mods, you want to use Impact Induction and Bomber for faster grenades, but outside of that, you're pretty free to use whatever mods you like. I suggest anything to buff your weapon damage and heavy ammo drops. The exotics also have options for any situation. I suggest pairing this build with Assassin's Cowl for survivability, Liar's Handshake for mini-boss or champion damage, and Star Eater Scales for boss damage. For weapons, I heavily suggest running a shotgun with 1-2 punch. Arcstrider is very melee focused, and this will improve your punches. A primary is not really needed since your melees can clear rooms very easily, but if you want to use one, I suggest using the Ikelos SMG with Volt Shot. Other than that, I simply suggest tried and true weapons such as Arbalest, Izanagi, Witherhoard, etc. For barrier champions, there is no arc counter, so take whatever seasonal or exotic intrinsic anti-barrier. I suggest Arbalest. For overload champions, simply throw a grenade or dodge and punch them. For unstoppable champions, you need to either use a flashbang grenade, dodge and double punch them, or I guess you could become amplified, then defeat an enemy standing right next to the champion with an arc special weapon, then dodge, spin, swap subclasses, do an emote, and maybe then finally Spark of Beacons will be viable. The easiest options will either be running flashbang grenades with Spark of Shock, or dodging and punching both champions. Just remember to double punch the unstoppable. For the playstyle, it's very basic. Start off with a dodge, then melee, then repeat. Toss a grenade whenever you feel like it. Use your shotgun if there are any enemies that don't go down in one punch. One of the big benefits to Arc Hunter is that it's not affected by the nerf to ability cooldown at all. Lethal Current combined with Gambler's Dodge takes cooldowns and throws them out the window, instantly refreshing your abilities. It's a very easy and unique playstyle of ability spam. Next up at number 4 is a very speculative option, but one I can comfortably say looks to be strong to use in a contest mode raid. Strand has, in my opinion, a much stronger crowd control kit than Stasis, so it'll be my go-to for encounters with no boss. We don't know everything about Strand, but we do know that we have a tool to lower enemy damage and offset the new cooldown nerf, a pseudo Warmind cell to throw or shoot or grapple to, an on-demand bonus to your armor, and a tool that can string up enemies so they can't even attack. This all sounds very powerful when DPS is not the central concern. This build's not 100% known, as all the fragments have not been announced yet, but Threat of Ascent sounds very nice and abusable. Mods are also unknown until we can get our hands on the subclass and see how it needs to be built. General mods like buffs to weapon damage, ammo finders, and the like will always be good to use. For exotics, we really don't have many options. Pseudarachne does sound like it could be strong if grappling's used often, but any of the good neutral game exotics like Wormhusk, Assassin's Cowl, Aeon Swift, or any others along those lines will work. For barrier champions, you need unraveling rounds, which we don't know how to get yet. If this isn't easy to activate, just use whatever anti-barrier you're already using, probably Arbalest. For overload champions, Strand has no counter, but they're the easiest to stun with weapons. A Volt Shot or Chill Clip legendary weapon takes a single shot to stun them, or use Divinity, Thunderlord, or any seasonal option. For unstoppable champions, suspending them will stun them, which is done with our new dive. That sounds very easy to handle, so we'll use that. Since we can't handle overload champions, I suggest a Chill Clip weapon when we have to fight those, but other than that you could probably use whatever the meta lines up to be. Next up is maybe a bit controversial, but I put the Gyrfalcon build at number 3. This build is admittedly a lot of fun, and even getting stronger next season, but I think it's hard to argue that it's stronger than the next 2 builds. The required elements for, in my opinion, the best Gyrfalcon build are Movius Quiver for DPS, Marksman Dodge for a faster cooldown to get on-demand invisibility, Vortex or Suppressor Grenade, Vanishing Step, Stylish Executioner, and Echoes of Persistence, Starvation, Undermining, and the new Echo of Cessation to create void breaches on almost every weapon kill, which will also give you Devour and Dodge cooldown. You could also run the new fragment that gives you an overshield on kills while your shields are broken. For mods, you'll be creating a ton of Orbs of Power with a Void Siphon mod, or Harmonic Siphon. So I think building hard into Void weapon damage mods will be strong, or even into Grenade Recharge. This build isn't as reliant on mods to be strong, as most of its function is built into the subclass. For your exotic, obviously you need to be running Gyrfalcon. This gives you volatile rounds every time you force yourself out of invisibility. Keep in mind you must come out of invisibility yourself, and not let the timer end. Also, lesser use is the additional effect where you finish an enemy while invisible to get enhanced cooldown and reserve overshields for your whole team. This is an extremely strong passive effect, especially with the new Echo of Cessation fragment. For weapons, your main weapon should be Void, whether it's a primary or your main weapon in a double special loadout. My favorite options are Unforgiven, Velis, Hollow Denial, or Null Composure. For your kinetic, you have the obvious trinity of Izanagi, Witherhoard, and Arbalest, but also definitely have a chill clip special weapon ready on the side. For heavy weapons, Void will be best, and a weird shout out to Leviathan's Breath, which is getting a huge buff next season. Taipan will still be viable if you want to stick with that, just make sure that you have a good Void weapon to use often, and a good DPS weapon or combo. For barrier champions, volatile rounds will handle them. Since this entire build is focused on volatile rounds, this should be easy. For overload champions, you can either run suppressor grenade or use a chill clip legendary weapon, or any other option from the season. For unstoppable champions, Void has no counter, but I suggest using Leviathan's Breath as it's getting a really nice buff and is Void, so it will get a little boost from volatile rounds. The gameplay loop is extremely simple. Just dodge to turn invis, use grenades whenever you can on high health enemies or groups of adds, and use your volatile rounds to easily clear rooms. The only thing you really need to keep track of is the debuff to Stylish, which prevents you from going invis from Stylish Executioner for a few seconds. Next up is probably my favorite build to run, the Healing Gunslinger. This build is all about maximizing Radiant and Restoration, making you deal massive damage while also being practically unkillable. The necessary items are Healing Grenade, On Your Mark, Knock 'em Down, and Embers of Torches, Solace, and Empyrean. I highly suggest using Blade Barrage, Gambler's Dodge, Knife Trick, and Embers of Singeing and Benevolence. For mods, we want to focus highly on getting your grenade back as fast as possible in case of emergencies, so I suggest using some combination of grenade kickstarts, impact inductions, and bombers, and maybe innervations. And definitely use like a harmonic siphon. Also, putting mods into solar weapon damage will make the build much stronger. We don't know all of the armor charge mods yet, but any of those that will give charges for minimal effort will help a lot. For exotics, you have a few options. First and foremost, Star Eater Scales is amazing for getting your super back faster, and also buffing your boss DPS. Star Eater Scales will also be a great option for Golden Gun, whether chaining supers with multiple solar hunters, or simply if a boss is hard to hit with a full Blade Barrage. For ad clear, you can run Caliban's Hand and swap to Proximity Explosive Knife. And for mini bosses or champions, you could use Athras' Embrace and swap to Weighted Knife. For weapons, your primary weapon should be solar. I highly recommend Explosive Personality for double special builds, or Callous Mini Tool for single special builds. Bonus points if you craft one to be Grave Robber and Incandescent. Your secondary can be anything, so the Trinity are still my top picks, except you can swap Arbalest with any chill clip special weapon. Arbalest won't be a bad choice, it just isn't needed as much on solar. For heavies, you can use whatever the DPS meta is. For barrier champions, any weapon will pierce barriers while you're radiant, which you will be at almost all times thanks to Ember of Torches and Empyrean. You can also run Acrobat's Dodge for Radiance on demand if you feel that's necessary. For Overload champions, Solar has nothing, and as of the new TWAB, apparently Radiant will not allow you to stun using Chill Clip. The best way to work around this is, I guess, to let Radiant expire, then use Chill Clip, but that sounds terrible. For Unstoppable, if you're Radiant, I guess you'll have to cause an ignition through various ways. And that might be the best option, but the easiest way is to freeze them with Chill Clip and shatter with anything else. The gameplay loop for this one starts out with tossing a healing grenade at our feet. This gives us a short period of restoration where we'll need to get a solar kill to extend it. Then we can swap between getting kills with melee and our solar weapon. Ad clear is a breeze with this setup, even under contest mode, and again you're practically unkillable with restoration. And you can also spam throwing out healing grenades to your teammates too. Once it comes to DPS, you have a very strong setup no matter what the boss is, and you have a lot of flexibility to adapt this build to fit any encounter. Lastly, and certainly not least, we come to what I believe is the best overall build for a day 1 raid, the Trapper's Ambush Nightstalker build, specifically paired with Orpheus rig. It has been so strange seeing the community eating up Orpheus rig before it was even good, and now that it's top tier, almost nobody uses it. I'll start out with the rationale for this build, as it might be a little confusing why I would put this above Gyrfalcon, especially after my last Void Hunter video. If you saw my last video, you might remember that I was very against using Orpheus rig for your exotic, when Star Eater scales buffed the DPS and total damage by much more. This is still true. However, in the last major sandbox update, Mobius Quiver was nerfed hard. Now each tether only lasts for about 6 seconds, where it used to last 8 seconds. On top of that, Divinity was also nerfed to be a weaker debuff than tether, making it more important than ever to have high uptime on tether. That's where Orpheus rig comes in. Orpheus fixes the nerf, allowing you to have high damage from the super and high uptime on the debuff, and this is how you should be using it. As you can see, the rotation allows you to have very high uptime on the debuff, as well as do a large chunk of DPS in the meantime. I won't be able to fully explain this here as it's a very complex topic and deserves its own video, but since your tether's a damage increase over any debuff like Divinity or Void Weaken, anything except Tractor Cannon, you'll get 13% extra damage from each player in that window, and that extra damage can be attributed to the tether. Orpheus rig allows you to get about 6 seconds extra uptime to any other tether build, and that extra time makes Orpheus tether add the most DPS to a team than any other super in the game. So let's go over what I use for the rest of the build. This is focused heavily on invis uptime for team safety. I run Mobius Quiver for DPS obviously, Gambler's Dodge to refill my smoke, Vortex or Suppressor Grenade, Vanishing Step, Trapper's Ambush to turn the team invisible on demand, and Echoes of Persistence and Starvation. The only part of this build that I really think you could swap out is Echo of Undermining, which I use for ad clear and debuffing bosses before or after the tether. A good option to swap this for will be some of the new fragments being added. For mods, you want to focus entirely on what will buff your DPS, so put 3 of whatever element damage boost you need, and anything to increase the timer of the damage boost. I would recommend absolutely not using any kickstart mods, as they will remove all your armor charges and reduce your weapon damage as a result. Also for this build, I would focus heavily on anything else that could increase your DPS, like targeting mods for faster aim down sight, and definitely reload mods to lower downtime during DPS. Because here's the best part about this build. With the new loadout system coming in Lightfall, with the press of a button, you can swap to this right before DPS, and outside DPS, use whatever other mods and exotics you want. The only thing that you will likely need to keep constant is the subclass setup, or you might risk losing all of your cooldowns, including your super. So let's go over what you can swap to. Outside of DPS, I would always go with the following mods: Mix and match these to however works for you, but these will be the main ones to slot. For your helmet, heavy ammo finder, a siphon mod, and ashes to assets. For arms, a reloader mod for your primary weapon, and some combination of impact induction, bolstering detonation, focusing strike, and grenade kickstart. For chest, probably just use damage resist, but if there's anything else good in there, you can put it in. For legs, put whatever heavy ammo scavenger you need, innervation, and stacks on stacks. You could also go with damage mods if you want. Lastly, for the class item, I would use utility kickstarts and special finisher. If there are any other new mods that sound good, they might be options there too. Also, I'm hearing some breaking news that Volatile Flow will return in the artifact, along with several other mods that will make the Void even stronger. This basically allows you to do the Gyrfalcon playstyle without ever even using the exotic. For exotics you can swap to with this build, I'll be running Aeon Swift for consistent heavy ammo drops for the whole team, but if that isn't necessary, Graviton Forfeit, Omnioculus, or Star Eater Scales are my top picks. For weapons, I highly suggest 3 different setups. First off is using a single special while using the DPS meta. For now, it appears that this setup will be Izanagi's Burden, a good primary like Voltshot Ikelos, or Frenzy Funnel Web, and either Bump in the Night with Autoloading Frenzy, or Hothead with Autoloading Explosive Light. If the artifact mod buffing Void damage will stack with other buffs, this probably changes your heavy weapon to Taipan. Second off is the Touch of Malice setup, paired with Null Composure and Taipan, or some other similar combo. This is less focused on having the highest DPS and is more of a utility loadout with amazing ad clear. Lastly, take the first loadout and swap your primary for another special weapon. I suggest Forbearance or Hollow Denial, but you can tailor this to whatever weapons you enjoy running for double special. Champions are the big weakness to this build, but usually they're easy to handle on a contest mode raid. For anti-barrier, we could run Volatile Flow, burst them down before the shield activates, have somebody else handle them, or you can swap to Arbalest and take a DPS loss, but you could also swap back to Izanagi right before DPS. For Overload, we can run Suppression Grenades, or use the Ikelos with Volt Shot or any other SMG because we'll have that mod in the artifact. For Unstoppable, we can use the Touch of Malice's Blinding Shot, have somebody else stun them, swap to Chill Clip and lower our DPS, or if it comes to it, just kill them slowly without the stun. And finally, we come to the playstyle. Honestly, there isn't much to this. You play this build exactly how you normally play. Just use your weapons and grenades to clear ads and mechanics. If you need safety or want to cheese any mechanics, you can simply turn invisible through a dive or a dodge. The best way to do this is to dive, and then when near an enemy, dodge to reset your cooldown and refresh your dive. Right as you're coming to DPS, open your menu, do a quick swap to your Orpheus rig setup, and do the tether combo that works best for your weapon. After DPS, you can swap back to your neutral game build. There's a ton of nuance here that you could find other improvements with swaps, but I just want to give you the foundation. So, those are my top 5 builds I'll have set up for the day 1 of the new raid. I know I left a lot of flexibility on most of these, but that's mainly due to not knowing exactly how much is changing with our mods and cooldowns. For anyone wanting a more rigid loadout to simply copy, I'll be working on finding the best setups when the game actually releases. But until then, thanks for watching.